Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band podcast. I am your host, Benedikt Wayne. If you are already a listener, welcome back. If you're new to the show, welcome. So glad to have you. Today is a special episode because we're doing an interview again, and our guest today is Hans-Martin Buff. Hans-Martin Buff is an audio engineer and producer from Germany who has worked at Pachyderm Studios in the early 90s and then became the personal in-house engineer for Prince, or the artist formerly known as Prince at the time, at Prince's Paisley Park Studios from what I believe was 96 to 2000, but he's going to tell us more about that, hopefully. He also worked with artists in bands like the Scorpions, Sheryl Crow, No Doubt, Peter Gabriel, Chaka Khan, many more. So that's quite the impressive credit list. Hans-Martin is also going to be a speaker at this year's Studio Szene event in Hamburg, where he's going to do a masterclass. So if you want to learn from him and see him live in person, as well as all the other great speakers on that incredible lineup there, go to studioszene.de/tickets. The link is going to be in the show notes because that's, for the non-German speaking people, probably impossible to get right. Studioszene.de/tickets, and get your tickets now. By the way, we are going to be there too. So Malcolm, Wayne, Thomas, and I, the whole team at the selfrecordingband.com, we're going to be there. We will be in Hamburg, record some podcasts there, document parts of the event, do a few other really cool things there that we can't really talk about yet. And we'd love to hang out with you. So we're going to do a little community meetup and we'll spend a few amazing days together in Hamburg. So go get your tickets now. All right, Hans-Martin, so stoked to have you on the show tonight. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to start with a weird question that I have to ask. And Malcolm, our co-host that's usually with us today, asked the question. He says, is it Hans or Martin or Buff?
Well, it's all of the above. It's like, my mother called me Martin, and my parents did. And so I didn't even know my name was Hans Martin until I showed up at school. I was like, why are they calling me what they calling me? And then the official thing is Hans Martin, which was kind of It was a German thing in the 60s when, it was like Jean-Phi, as the French do with stuff, just Hans and then dash something or another. And then Buff, which was a difficult name in my teenage years, turned out to be pretty internationally compatible. And that's what the British call me and the Austrians. So the answer is whatever you want to do. It's up to you. I'm in.
Yeah. That was a confused Canadian asking that question because I assume they don't have the double first name thing, I guess. So that's why I was asking. And the reason Malcolm is not here today, I have to tell you, people, if you're listening now, usually Malcolm is our co-host, of course, but today he can't make it. But I got great news. I'm not alone still because my friend and co-host Wayne Coulson is today here. So he's the co-host for this show. He's usually, you guys probably know him because we mention him a lot on the podcast. He's editing the podcast usually and mixing it. And today he's going to co-host with me. So, hey, Wayne.
How's it going?
Great to have you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
All right, Hans-Martin, maybe let's start with your backstory a little bit and your role in the studio. Is like, just so people understand what you actually do. Are you mainly a producer these days? Are you engineering a lot? And how did you get there? Just a quick version before we go into all the details.
A quick version? Well,
yeah.
All right, the really quick version is I, at some point, discovered the beauties of working in recording studios and became a recording engineer. And then as that goes, most music producers were either engineers first or musicians first, so you kind of grow into that role. And so I've always done that on the side. In the beginning it was kind of I thought it was producing, but I could produce if the band agreed with my decisions, so I was a cheap engineer called producer. And these days, actually, it's quite nice. I really got into, the great world of 3D audio, as I call it. And so I don't really know what my role is. I get to do what I think I should do, which is a wonderful thing to be able to do. People say, well, you're onto something. Do it with my music. And so I don't really produce and I don't really engineer. I just kind of get to finagle music to a place where I think it works in a three-dimensional context. So that's completely a non-answer, but that's, there you have it. That was kind of the long road to where I am now, from basic, traditional engineering to whatever that is I do today.
No, that's great. That's perfect. And it's also cool that you mentioned, or I just want to repeat that on basically every episode because people still are confused by that. That like a producer is not the same as an engineer, and that what you do now is kind of something different again, or like somewhere in between. But just that there's a difference between those roles. And then also the whole 3D thing, we'll get to that on the show for sure, because I'm really interested in that. That's something I don't know too much about, but that's why you're here for, what you're here for today, to explain that to us. I mean, I know a little bit about it, of course, and I've dabbled with it, but not nearly to the degree that you have. And also the approach that you have regarding that seems to be pretty interesting and different to what a lot of other people do now. So we'll get to that. Great. Now, but that started, I guess, just a couple of years ago, right? Before that, you were probably mainly making records with bands in stereo, I assume.
Correct, and I still am. I still do stereo stuff. It's just currently it's not as much as it used to be. It's like just because I do so much of the 3D stuff. But yeah, I just got into that. I would say five and a half years ago. I'm not going to bore you too much with the details, but it's, a friend of mine gave me a binauralized, so made for headphones version of Beatles and a Pink Floyd 5.1 mix that he just made himself. Not the mix, but the binauralized aspect. And that really triggered my interest because I thought, wow, that makes a huge difference. I always thought, to this day, I think I know, at least through one degree of separation, I probably know every person that has more than 10 speakers in their house in the country. So I thought, well, I'm not one of them, I might add. No. And so I always thought, well, what's the point of all that? So that the headphone bit changed things for me, and then I really got hooked on the creative possibilities of the musical world beyond stereo. So that's how that changed. But up to then, I was totally into the stereo world, just like the rest of us.
Cool. Do you have more of a say now in the projects you're involved with? So are you more producing now because of the 3D thing? Just because you make music for 3D basically, and maybe help artists accomplish that, or is it still mainly engineering when you make records like that?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, it really depends on why I'm being brought to the table. But at this point, the people that bring me to the table for the 3D thing, they wanna have some of what I'm having because they're intrigued by not just the promotional possibilities of Atmos. Right now that's just a really nice way of getting on the Apple playlist, but like of the creative ones, and that's what I'm after. So, I mean, it's technically not production, but I have a lot of creative leeway that I'm certainly using. But you know what? I've kind of grown into that too. I have a friend called Mack, M-A-C-K, who I don't know if you're aware of him, but he produced a lot of Queen stuff, like Another One Bites the Dust, and he engineered all the ELO stuff that And anyway. Great guy.
A band I've worked with in the past went on to work with him at some point. So I know who that is, definitely. Yeah.
Lovely man. And we were in conversation, Mutual Appreciation Society, and he more or less, told me how, he walked into the Queen gig and just without even knowing them went like, let's do this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, is there a distinction between your engineering involvement and your producing involvement? And he said, not really, because why would I hide my ideas? And that's where I'm at this point as well. It's just, I offer my ideas, and I think the only difference between engineering and producing is my duty to make sure these ideas are heeded or at least tried. You kind of brought it up earlier, but like, for people who aren't so sure about the difference, it's like a producer in music is like the director in a movie. So it's the person that calls kind of, not necessarily the shots, but like judges the quality of the performances and kind of mostly is in charge of the direction. Is like, so is this great or isn't it? I mean, that's the big question that a producer has to answer. An engineer doesn't. The engineer is like the cameraman in a movie. So you kind of sonically translating the wishes of the producer and the artist and making them happen. But you're not judging if they're good ideas or bad ideas. Yeah. So that is the difference now. I bring my ideas to the table, and as a producer, I have to make sure that they try them because it's my responsibility for stuff to be good in the end. Whereas an engineer, if it sounds good in the end, that's good enough. I mean, clearly it would be great if it would be a fabulous record, but it's not my responsibility. So that's where I'm at right now. I bring my ideas to the table, and then the credit on the album just kind of shows how intensely I brought them to the table.
Yeah.
So
if you're lucky to get the proper credits with it, which can sometimes be a battle you have to fight.
Well, that's one of the things actually I do these days as a producer. I mean, most of my projects are still handshake, so I don't sign stuff. But when you do bigger things as a producer, you sign something. And what's in mine is like I get to look at the credits.
Yeah,
I get to okay the credits
important.
because that seems to be to this day that confuses the shit out of me is how hard it seems to be to write a credit. To me, it's like, well, either you've done it or you haven't. Yeah. But for a lot of people, it's kind of a badge of honor. And for people in my business, that's credit.
Yeah,
is
the lifeblood
what gets you
of the business.
Yeah, it's what gets you work. So
it's always funny when you look at a big, like a YouTube video, and then you look up, you try to figure out who's mixed the song or who produced it, and then you see this big list of credits of every single person who was involved in the video and no audio person. It's like so common when I want to look up things, and it's always like, it can be pretty hard even as a consumer, as a listener, to figure out who did it like quickly, But anyway, good thing you do that with looking at the credits now. What's interesting to me is that you say that you said the part about why would I hide my ideas? Because last week we interviewed Jill Zimmerman, who I think actually. She mentioned that you were her professor at university in somewhere in Germany. I think she's now working in Canada at Chukasa Studios. She's worked with some very big artists there and won a couple of Juno Awards or the records she worked on. And so I don't know if there is a connection or not, but when I talked to her, she's an engineer at this commercial studio, and she kind of said the exact opposite but that's probably because there's always a producer in the room, where she was like, yes, I'm engineering, and I'm not the assistant. I'm in charge of like the sonic decisions and everything, and to make sure that the vision comes out of the speakers, but I will not bring up my ideas, even though I sometimes think they are great ideas, but I will not bring them up because there's a producer in the room, and it's not my job to say something there in regards of the creative vision and the direction and stuff. So that was pretty interesting. But I guess the difference is there an actual producer there that's hired for that and an engineer?
No,
as well,
the difference is the age. That's really it. I'm
Really?
at the point where, people don't hire me exclusively for my skill. They don't go like, oh, I need an engineer and he's done some and he's at that studio, which is a huge difference anyways from when I started. It's like when I started in the business 30 years ago, you needed an engineer just to run the freaking place. It wasn't necessarily just, about sonic brilliance. It was about how do I get the sound through all this analog equipment and can reproduce it in the end. And now it's more like something you afford yourself. It's like a chauffeur rather than a auto mechanic. So, I wouldn't have done that unless they asked me at the time. And then, with a lot of, I don't have really that many pure engineering gigs anymore where, I work with people that needed somebody to run the joint. And if I do, very rarely, then I vibe out the place and just go like, well, are they open to stuff? But, that's just part of the deal. For example, with Peter Gabriel now, I work with these very capable engineers that he works with, and they're all so young, they're all like under 26.
Wow.
So just by my being as old as I am, I kind of had some dad possibilities, and it's expected and I'm used to it. So, I give advice that they can totally ignore, but they seek it out. So that's where I'm going with this. It's like people that hire me at this point, they don't just want somebody to set up mics.
Yeah.
They want to ask, so how do you usually do this? Or how did Prince do it? Or how did blah, blah do it? Or, and so a narrative is being set up, and I went for it. I don't push myself on somebody else. And like, for example, the Scorpions, I've been their engineer in some capacity now for 15 years or something. And the last album I produced, officially co-produced with them, kind of grew into that role from just helping out, and then circumstantial. I became kind of the producer. But, my role didn't change that much. The only difference was with producers on previous albums, I'd go like, can I make a suggestion? And then I bring up my ideas and they go like, oh, that's cool. Oh, nah. But it wouldn't hurt anybody. It wouldn't hurt me either if they say
Okay.
no.
Yeah.
And the difference, oddly enough, with the Scorpions, once it was decided that I now am a producer in this, it went from like me offering suggestions to them demanding them, which was, I didn't expect that,
Yeah.
but that
Yeah.
was really interesting. All of a sudden, it was like, "So what are we gonna do?" I'm like, "Okay, that's how that works."
How did they take that? How did they take you changing from that? Were they okay with that? Did they accept it?
Well,
Or
yeah, I couldn't do that without him. It's like more or less, I said, "Look, here's what it is." What happened is this: so they had a very capable producer lined up, a guy named Greg Fiedelman, who himself was an engineer many years ago. He was a Rick Rubin's main guy in the '90s. And then kind of grew into this really, really good hard rock metal dude who produced, he produces Metallica and he produces Slipknot and stuff like that. So the pandemic kind of ruined that. There was a while of back and fro with him on Zoom and blah, blah, blah. And then it came to the nuts and bolts of it all. And it just couldn't be done to everybody's satisfaction in a transcontinental way. So the decision was made that it was going to be done with the Scorpions and me already having been part of the sound bit, and me being part of all the demos and always offering suggestions, where we could go. And so at that point, I was like, "Look, people, I am producing this. I should be on the album as a producer." And they went, "Yes, that's right." So they were very kind about it. But then at that point, really, it went from me going, "Wow, that was cool. Let's do that again." Or, "Why don't you do this?" to like, "What should I do?" Not like in a helpless, you do the work
No.
type thing, but it was just
No.
a very obvious switch in the atmosphere that occurred. And I was like, okay, that's how that works.
You co-produced with the band in a way,
Yeah,
basically.
and
Then. Yeah.
even if they would have said, even though they said, "You're the producer now by yourself," I wouldn't have accepted that because, yeah, it was good that way. It was really good. Everybody had their thing that they could do, and it was a wonderful record. I've done lots of records with them, and most of the time they didn't have time. They had to they've always had time to make a good record, but it was always about just getting it done and then going on the road and blah. And all of a sudden they couldn't go on the road, so we made this fabulous record where they show up from their houses every day and really enjoy each other's company and make a record together and take all the time you want. And I have to say, looking back, that's really, in all these years I've done this, and with all the big names I've done this, that's the first record ever that was done like I learned in recording school how records are supposedly done. You do demos, and then you do pre-production, and then you do more pre-production with everybody, and then you do basics, and then you do overdubs, and then you take a break and you reassess, and then you re-record some stuff.
It's nice when it flows like that, right? When you know exactly what to expect and there's the clear steps and everything.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
The cool thing about it was, too, it wasn't planned that way. It just grew that way because there was no alternative. They couldn't really do anything else. And so it wasn't, a lot of times back in the day when a lot of money was made with records people thought, unless I spend 4 years on that record, it can't possibly be good, which is just silly. But, so this one, it just happened that way. It wasn't like, okay, we'll do it by the book. It just ended up being done by the book. So there you go.
Now, another question on production and engineering and in general, like that comes from Malcolm. He left a couple of notes for me because he's like, yeah, he wanted to be on this very much, but he couldn't. But he left a couple of notes and questions for me. So he said he wanted me to talk to you about the less appealing sides of the job, and he says like producing and engineering can be like comes with sort of a baggage sometimes and can ruin your relationship with the music in a way. So I'm just asking this now because you mentioned how long some of these projects can sometimes take and how much time you spend with the music, and you obviously don't listen like a listener anymore if you do a lot of that. And so does that change not only your relationship with the record that you're making, that you can't ever listen to it again like a listener, or does that maybe even change the way you're listening to music in general? And maybe there's downsides to that as well. And I'm sure a lot of engineers can relate.
That's a really good question. There's an answer to each of these aspects. So like, When I started out, right, one of my first big assistant gigs was with a band called Live. They had a huge album called Throwing Copper. And that was not a very happy session, you know. It was, be that as it may, it wasn't a very happy session. And the producer was this guy, Jerry Harrison of the Talking Heads. And I am, to this day, a huge Talking Heads fan. And because I was kind of unhappy, and they didn't give me credit in the end, which I will never forgive them for. No assistant credits on that thing. I do have a platinum album that I had to buy myself, but there you go.
You got the
Just
platinum
going back to
record,
the
but no
beginning.
credits.
So
that's funny.
anyway, anyway, Karma Band. Anywho, so for about a year after that session, I couldn't listen to a Talking Heads album without the experience being tainted by the Harrison wasn't happy thing. And by the way, I don't blame him for that, because he was, you know, in this situation with me being the new guy, and I think I've faked it till I made it very often, but there I did. I was, you know, out of recording school, and I was saying yay to everything that I had remotely heard about in recording school, but I winged it all, paid for it by not sleeping ever and not eating for 3 days and stuff like that. But anyway, so that was the experience. You know, it's like, okay, this may turn stuff off for you, and that certainly happened with Prince later. Who, you know, I was a big fan of. I was a really big fan of a couple of things, huge. And now I cannot watch him on YouTube or listen to that stuff without hearing things, you know, because I know him so well, or at least the way he communicated or uncommunicated with people around him. So I watch a YouTube thing and I go like, oh, bad mood or good mood. Or that person's going to get fired. Or that person doesn't know what's going on, but she thinks, this really should happen. You know? So it's not mine anymore. So that's number one. Number two, listening like a listener, or like a punter, as they say in England. I think that's really important, and that's one of the privileges for myself, because I love listening to music, and I don't listen to it as an engineer or as a producer.
Cool.
I can listen to it at face value. And one of my favorite moments is when the two collide. So for example, something I've known since I was 12 or whatever is playing as I'm sitting in a really great listening environment. All of a sudden I hear stuff I've never heard before. You know, I hear like craft stuff. And then last but not least, you know, when this is probably the biggest difference between a producer and an engineer. The main job of a producer is to listen to the album as though he was a listener. So the producer is the judge, more or less, to go like, this is great. And this is why I want to listen to that record as a listener. Whereas as an engineer, I don't have to. I mean, I just need to make sure the snare sounds good. But the producer is both like my boss as an engineer, and the coach of the artist, and the representative of my grandma, who has never in her life said, honey, you know what you've done at 5K? On the snare, wow, that's awesome. She either likes it or she doesn't, you know what I mean? And that's what a producer has to do. So, you know, it's a combination of those things. But so many of my buddies can't listen to music anymore as music. They listen to talk radio or totally different music. You know, they came in as metal dudes, and now they listen to Shostakovich or whatever.
Yeah.
Something that they don't have to think about, you know?
Yeah, I'm actually kind of like that. I listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks and stuff but that's not because I can't listen to music anymore. It's basically because I'm listening to music all day anyway while I'm working, and so maybe that's part of it. But but did it ever happen to you the other way around? Because I had that too, which is very unfortunate, where you mentioned you've listened to things you enjoyed as a kid, and now you enjoy it even more because you hear things you didn't hear before, and like, you know, you hear the craft and everything. But did it ever happen the other way around, where you used to like something and now you kind of can't enjoy it as much anymore because you realize how bad the production is, for example? Sometimes that happened to me, and that's such a bummer, because some of my favorite records, I still can listen to them for nostalgic reasons, but I don't enjoy them as much anymore because of certain things that now annoy me, you know, harsh cymbals.
Well,
bullshit like that.
well, both has happened, but that happened pretty early. So as soon as I kind of got an appreciation of sonic things, well, on the positive side, all of a sudden I started listening to stuff like Steely Dan and go like, wow, that's nice. Whereas
Yeah.
before that was just, to me, that was just snobby jazz dude, listen music stuff.
Yeah.
I was wrong, clearly. On
Yeah.
the other hand, for example, I'm a big punk fan, so I lived in Minneapolis. One of the great attractions was stuff like, Husker Du and the Replacements, and specifically Husker Du just sounds like shit.
It does.
My God. But I know I don't know the guy who did it, Steve Fjellstedt or whatever his name was.
I don't know.
But I did stuff for the same record company, for Twin Tone, and I did. Oh no, they weren't even on Twin Tone. But anyway, I did. I know people who know people, and that was clearly their decision. They produced their own stuff. That was their decision. Actually, oddly enough, on that live thing, the engineer, very good engineer, Lou Giordano, was their front of house guy. So there were lots, and the bassist of Husker Du was the caterer. He's a great chef. He has, I don't know if he still has a restaurant, but fabulous. But anyway, but that was one that just kind of got ruined for me. I listened to that and I go like, ugh. Nah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. And yeah, I'm like, punk rock is my thing. I grew up listening to punk records all the time, and like it's the majority of what I work on today. A more modern form of it, but like still. And so it happened to me quite a lot that those records that I didn't care at all about what they sounded like back when I discovered them, but now I care, and that made some of it pretty hard to listen to. But yeah, thank you for answering that. That's interesting, and also that it goes both ways. Cool. I haven't even thought about the personal part of that. I was mainly thinking about the sonic part and like the way you listen to music, but the personal part, of course, plays a role. Where like the memories from the sessions and the people you worked with and all of that, of course, that's a big part of it actually. So thank you for sharing that. Now, speaking of sharing, do you? And you obviously do. You're at this masterclass. You're holding this masterclass in Hamburg, but how do you feel about sharing your knowledge and helping engineers, develop their craft and their ears, or like helping them get into this field and doing things like the master classes? And I think you're teaching, or you have been teaching at a university too. How do you feel about all of that? Because I know that, you're doing it. So, but on the other hand, like you probably know, or how do I say this? It's a complicated, because that's what we do here. We teach people, but we also know that it just takes so much experience and so much time to really get good and develop an ear. And then that just something like doing a masterclass or taking an online course, or even studying, is not going to turn you into an amazing producer and engineer right away. So any thoughts on this? And I don't know how you feel about this, because there's a lot of different opinions.
It's kind of a yin-yang thing, you see. I think the basic skills that are part of the studio job are fairly limited. I went to one of those private schools in the States, in Minneapolis, and then called Music Tech, later McNally Smith, don't exist anymore. And it was a 1-year vocational program, and then they kind of showed you the basic stuff. And then the idea was you go out there in the world as an assistant, you kind of just, you up your game and you kind of figure that out. And even though now I'm very appreciative of like proper Tonmeister hookups and stuff, and just the level of information that they can that they have at their service. I still think that was a pretty good approach, because my learning, at least in the pop world, was through people and how they took all the things that we all know and turn them into workflows. And so, to answer your question, me teaching, I'm very careful to keep a balance between doing it and talking about doing it, because I know very good engineers, I would say, almost gurus of mine to a certain extent of the past. When I talk to them now, it is totally clear to me that they're not doing it anymore. They're talking about it, and they kind of poured their memory of their experience into formulas, which don't work for me, because anyway, I don't know, it's kind of weird to say, but like, for example, when you're an assistant, one of the things that you really learn is you work, let's say, a session with guy A and then a session with guy B, and they have totally different approaches, but it both works well at the end. So it's about applying things and using your ear to be the guide for your choice of tools, not about the tools themselves. And that's kind of the weird thing. So when I do master classes and stuff, a lot of people go away kind of disappointed because they figured, if I show up there, I'll get that one little thing that I'm missing that he has and I don't. And then afterwards I can do whatever. And all I tell him is to show him like, okay, this is a good way to approach this problem or do this and that and the other thing. And then, rather than this is the one way to do it, which there isn't. So I like doing it. I'd like doing the workflow thing because I always appreciated it myself. I like sharing that. I'm a bit more reluctant to share the 3D thing just because, in stereo, everybody knows more or less what is good. And in 3D, they don't. So I'm trying to define that. And then
we're not there yet. Mm-hmm.
No. So I'm kind of sharing thoughts and basic approaches, but I'm not really going, okay, this is my tool set and this is what I do and blah. Because that A may change and B, people need to figure that out themselves first.
Totally. That makes total sense. Yeah. The reason why I'm asking this is basically, like, obviously I believe in sharing knowledge and education, and I try to do exactly what you say, like that. My main gig is still I'm a mixing engineer. I do that full time, and on the side I share these things and build this platform. But I do that every single day, and I try to stay relevant and always improve, of course. But so that's part of it. But the main reason is that I believe that it works, and I believe that people can learn things a lot quicker and with less trial and error than just a few years or decades ago, especially if you're like in a remote area with no access to a studio. That's completely changed, obviously, and that's a great thing. But also the expectations are sometimes just unrealistic. Like you said, like people think that they walk away with that golden nugget and then it all clicks, or they take an online course and then they move on to making like #1 records. Like there's something somewhere in between, right? You can improve fast and you can learn a lot and you can make your own music sound great all of a sudden, which is happening all the time. But there's still a difference to people who've been doing it for decades, and there's so much more that goes into making really, really great records. And it's always great to talk to people like you with a lot of experience, just so people get a perspective of like what actually goes into making these records and the stories that people went through and the learnings and all of that. And so, education and sharing knowledge is very important, but I think it doesn't work without some time, the minimum amount of time that you have to put into it, and being in the room with a lot of people, a lot of different people also who know what they're doing. So what do you think is actually the best way these days to get into the industry? If you're not doing it just for yourself, but maybe you want to be an engineer or a producer professionally, what do you think is the best way to get into that today? Is it still the whole intern, runner, assistant thing? Is it going to audio school? Is it a combination? What do you think?
I do believe like that a solid footing of information is a good deal. I mean, there's nothing wrong if you're clever enough to, work it all up with binge watching YouTube videos and stuff. It's fine. I mean, in a weird way, I'm so jealous of all that information that people have now. And, even stuff me as a fan. I just did a car ride the other day and I popped all these Beatle outtakes from Revolver into a playlist. And you just learn by the decisions that they discarded, more than by, pulling stuff apart. But I do believe, I'm a firm believer in learning from people by being in the room with people. Mm-hmm. And this doesn't have to be necessarily an engineer as an assistant and stuff, but with good artists as well too, listening, communication, that's what it's all about. You see, when I started as an assistant, I found out pretty quickly that my recording school instruction wasn't really the main thing that made people want to work with me or like me, but just, I guess, the combination of my possibility and like my personality and stuff like me having worked at a bar or, in a hotel for a long time, just being able to anticipate what people needed, And that type of communication, I think, is just gold for learning stuff. And, it's a shame. It's a shame that there isn't that much of an infrastructure for it anymore. And if you take Jill, for example, who I didn't know that we had met actually, but she gets suggested in social media as somebody I should definitely know, type stuff. So I looked who she was doing, and it sounded like, it's, a smart person who just kind of went for a spot that she thought was interesting and then made herself useful
Yeah.
and then clearly became good at what she was doing, and now she's being hired for being herself and working up a resume and stuff. The young people at Real World, for example, most of them went either to LIPA in Liverpool, the Institute of Performing Arts, I believe it's called, the thing that Paul McCartney kind of founded, or to the Tonmeister course in Surrey. And they offer Real World, just like Abbey Road, by the way, they offer placements. So if you go to the Surrey thing, you work a year somewhere. So you do all this high-level studying stuff, and they're all decent musicians, and they have a good ear, and then for a year they work in these places, and then they go back to school. So I think that's the perfect approach: is instruction, reality check in the real world, and then augmenting that knowledge. And I, for one, I really enjoy the very rare moments where I get to sit in on other people's sessions. Because at my level, or my right or wrong, but it's like, it looks like espionage when I go like, hey, what are you doing? But with a bunch of buddies, it's like you go in and you check this out, and you go away both with the security of like, okay, well, I figured something out that they figured out as well. Meaning, I'm on the right track, and then going, okay, that's a cool approach, and then you share that in return, and everybody wins. So I think that's really cool.
Oh, totally. Also, I always enjoyed, haven't done this in a while actually, but I always enjoyed sitting in on mastering sessions sometimes, just being there and like of things that I mixed and then taking it to a mastering engineer and just being there and watching what they do and hopefully maybe get some feedback. That was also always a completely different perspective that helped me a lot with mixing.
That's one of the, that's good thing you're bringing this up. You see, one of the main differences between, let's say, my first decade in the business and now is the participation of the artist, for example. There was not a single mix up, I would say, until about 29-ish, 10-ish or something, where the artist wouldn't be present, at least for a substantial bulk of it, and go like, Prince, my God, I was always hoping he'd have to go to the movies or something. So I would have a couple hours to kind of work on that without him just going wink, 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 wink all the time. Now, there are really good clients that I have that I've never met. I mean, we've FaceTimed or Zoomed or whatever it is you do these days, and emailed, but I've never sat in the same room with these people. I don't think that's a good thing necessarily. And the same with mastering. So with mastering, in the beginning, and I'm a spoiled brat because, I went from like no mastering and just paying somebody to put my mixes on a CD master. And then, there was a program called Sonic Solutions, I think it was called. And they would just add a bit of EQ if you asked them, or made it a bit louder, but there was no mastering. To going straight to grunt bands with Prince's stuff. So I'd sit there with Brian Big Bass Gardner was a fabulous dude. Yeah. Being in charge of the Prince master. And I've learned a lot through that. Just not, in terms of frequency range and stuff, but just like their approach to listening and their chill and stuff. Yeah. So being in the same room, I think that's a loss to the digital age. Yeah.
Oh, totally. And then you gotta know that what I do is probably the extreme of that, because like I'm exclusively mixing, and almost all of it is online with people from somewhere on this planet. And so the majority of the artists that I work with, I haven't met before. And so I'm kind of, for me, that's completely normal, but I totally see what you're saying there. And in fact, whenever I work with a band from Germany or somewhere in Europe that's somewhat close, I actually, if at all possible, at least at the end of the process, I like them here in the room so that we can do a final revision, round or something together, or like some extra production, post-production stuff, or just a way of like also me showing them some ideas and getting instant feedback whether or not they like it. The creative stuff is so much easier that way, because if they are somewhere else and I do some crazy creative decision that they might not like, it's always a little, you do it, but then if they don't like it, you have to undo everything. And if they're just right next to you, you can just quickly do it and get instant feedback. And so I actually enjoy that a lot. But in most of the projects, unfortunately, that's not possible for me. So you're totally right. But see, that those are the things that I sometimes forget about, because it's so normal for me, because I haven't worked in a time where you were always in the studio with the artist, actually. only the stuff that I produced, obviously, before I went to straight mixing. But mixing was always remote for me.
And the thing is, I work with a lot of older artists. So and they hire not just me, but they hire whomever they hire to bring whatever it is they have to the table. Whereas, like when I work with a band that's doing it for the first time in a professional setting, it's always kind of a fight because you go like they're just suspicious of your ideas because they perceive it as an intrusion into their creative thing, and they just have to get used to the communication that is creativity and the constant generation and trashing of ideas. That's what creativity is. And then, for example, Peter Gabriel is just a charm, man. I mean, I get to do, well, we can talk about this in detail if you want to at some point, but
Yes.
so I do what I do for quite a while. Mm-hmm. And then he comes in at the end, and even though he's totally aware of the tools of the trade, I mean, he's made his first record the year I was born, 1969, with Genesis, the first Genesis record. So he knows what he's doing. But he's never one of those guys of like, use that type of reverb for this and that. It's about like, he goes like, I don't like what it does to the narration. He's one of those people who's like, this is where I want to go with the song, and this is in the way. And that is a perfect way of communicating with somebody who knows what they're doing. So, with a new person, it's a lot of times about, well, this is, I don't like this type of compression or whatever. But with him, it's not about that at all. It's about the creative direction of the final ditty. And it always gets better once he's left the room. It's always better because he's put it in. I have a way of rethinking the approach, and it's never a rehaul anyways. It's just a little thing, but it's just just because he was in the room, the final product will be better. Well, how couldn't it be? I mean, he put in the first spark, and now the fire is burning. How could my fire be totally the same thing? You always add your own stuff to it.
That's very interesting. Yeah, we'll get to the whole Peter Gabriel conversation definitely in more detail. Let's just circle back a little bit because I have some questions about the beginning of your journey. We kind of skipped that, but I want to go over that real quickly and then move to the 3D audio and Peter Gabriel thing in detail for sure, because that's really relevant and to me very interesting. I've got a lot of questions there. So one thing I need to ask, because our audience is primarily like rock, alternative, punk sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, baby.
And you've gone. I just have to ask. You started. I think that was your first main gig, basically at Pachyderm Studios, right, in the US after audio school, and you arrived at the studio at the time when Nirvana showed up to record In Utero, and I think you didn't have anything to do with that record, but you were there, right? So there must be some Nirvana stories or something. Is there anything you can share from that time? Because it's crazy to me to come out of recording school, get a gig at the studio, and then Nirvana shows up. I don't know what it felt like for you at the time, if it was the same, but like...
I never met him, so they kept me out of the place until... that was a super quick session, you have to realize, that was just such a great band. So it was a 2-week session, and if I remember correctly, they did basics for 2 days, they did overdubs for 2 days, and then they mixed for 10. The end. That's it. And for those 2 days, I was not allowed to show up. Afterwards, I cleaned up after them, and I got the stories, and I had the mixes before it came out. I've never been that popular in my life. It was awesome.
But those were the Albini mixes, right? There was a second...
they stayed the Albini mixes. I believe the only one that was remixed by Scott Litt was All Apologies, I think. All Apologies. Everything else is exactly how those mixes... So there, but so the stories, all the stories I have, and I have stories, are secondhand.
Okay,
I'll hook you up with Brent, who was there. Brent Sigmuth,
oh, that
fabulous.
Would be awesome. That would be amazing.
He's a great friend, and he's the guy who dragged me. No, he didn't drag me. He was a friend, and he started at the recording school a bit before I did. And I went to see him, to see him, and I thought, wow, this is awesome. I'll do that too. And then he was the assistant at Pachyderm, and they were looking for another guy. And he said, I know this guy Hans. So Brent looms large in my legend, and he lives there, and he's done a lot of cool indie stuff, and he was Mr. Pachyderm for like 10 years or so. He's
Wow.
a great guy. I'll hook you up.
Oh,
I don't know if
that
he
would
does
be
that,
really amazing.
but he has the real story, so let's just leave it at that.
Okay.
But, you know,
Still a
by
cool
all
thing to be able
accounts,
to say.
yeah, I mean, there were cool guys, and it's
Yeah.
interesting now that Dave Grohl is like, you know, he's like the Don of all of us, isn't he?
Yeah.
And then he was just the nerdy drummer, apparently, you know. And the guy who was really the spokesperson was Chris Novoselic,
Really?
who was, you know, politically aware, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, he's of Croatian descent, and that was during the wars there at the time, and yeah, there you
Yeah.
go.
There you go.
So,
All right. Fair enough.
but Pachyderm, I should say this: Pachyderm, you know, is it's not a particularly a rock studio. It's just a great
Mhm.
studio out in the middle of nowhere. The story behind it is that it was like the summer house of local milling kings. You know,
Mhm.
Minnesota is the state where Pachyderm is was known for, you know, the agriculture and for mining, um, blah.
Yeah.
So anyway, lots of rich people from that thing, and they built this house, which is kind of like, you know, if you watch The Graduate or
Mm-hmm.
something like that type of house,
Yeah.
just, you know, a really hip 50s, 60s house. And then the guy who owned it, when he was my boss at the time, he bought it and then built a studio next to it, and that's Pachyderm. So it's a great place to go away and be focused. And Nirvana at the time, you know, couldn't go away anywhere. I seem to remember that
Yeah.
they had even a fake name when they showed up. They didn't book it as Nirvana. They booked it as the Richie, whatever Sid Vicious's real name is. I forget that
I didn't
name
know that.
experience or something like that. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, it
Wow.
was good, but it was great for me because, you know, that opened, you know, the studio's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so beyond the new studio vibe and the local cool band attraction, all of a sudden people like Life would show up who wouldn't have
Yeah.
showed
Yeah.
up without that. And, you know, Steve Albini liked the place. And he did, before he did Nirvana, he did actually Rid of Me by PJ Harvey there.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
and if you know that and you compare the two, you go like, okay.
Yeah.
And you kind of hear that great drum sound you can get in the joint.
Yeah.
And it's fabulous. So
And electrical wasn't even a thing then, right? It just that was years later, I think, that he built electrical audio, his own studio,
electrical
Albini.
audio? Oh,
Yeah,
Albini. Yeah, yeah.
Albini. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if he had the studio in Chicago then, but I
I
think
think it
he's
was
already lived
96 or
there.
90. Yeah, I think it was 96 or 97 that he built
There
that,
you
if
go.
I'm not
Well,
wrong.
you
Yeah.
know, Albini, bless his heart, doesn't take royalties.
Yeah.
So he got a big mountain of money for that Nirvana thing for those 2 weeks of work. But mountains
But
of money tend to go away, especially in the recording business. And
yeah.
so I assume I've never met him in person, which
Yeah.
much I'd love to. I assume that mountain of money
Yeah.
did good things for him in Chicago for his studio stuff. But then it
Definitely.
was gone. You know, he'd be a
Yeah.
multi-millionaire for if you
Yeah.
were just taking a cut.
Definitely. But he still, to this day, doesn't seem to regret that. So if you listen
No,
to
I
interviews with him,
get, I
that's
get.
just his thing. It's like, you
Well,
know,
I get the way he puts it. He goes like, "Well,
yeah.
it's like an architect saying, you know, I built this house, and now you have to pay me every year because you live there."
Yeah.
Bless his heart. I
Yeah.
do,
Totally.
I do believe, you know, there's a yin yang thing because
Yeah.
if you're a good producer, you're really part of the creative process. But he doesn't do that. You know, he creates an environment where people come in and they need to
Yeah.
do what they do. What am I supposed to do? He goes like, well, how the hell would I know? You're the band.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but a
However,
lot of producing is telling people
Mhm.
what to do and showing directions.
Yeah.
And I think if you do that type of production, getting a cut is not stealing
No.
from the artist at all.
No. And I
No.
think, although he always says he's just an engineer and not a producer, there's still a sound to his records, and he's still like he still obviously works with the band and is part of that. And I think it's more than just capturing it in a way. But he it's not not our call to make that to, he has to know how he wants to deal with that. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. But you know what? That's the thing that's changed, anyways, too, during those days, is that engineers have become brands.
Mm-hmm.
If you like, let's take Peter Gabriel, because if you take, for example, So, his biggest record, that wasn't mixed by some star mixer dude. That was mixed by the guy who recorded it.
Yeah.
And that's how people used to do it. You put the stuff together in the end. And now you have these very specialized, very good people who don't do anything else and do like your mix in 4 hours. And it'll in the end it'll sound like them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if that's entirely a good thing all the time. So
Yeah.
I don't know where Steve Albini fits into this, but you can clearly hear when he's the guy. Isn't always good, but I don't know if that I don't know if that Stooges album is that great, but
Yeah.
I can certainly look at my CV and tell you that a lot of it isn't that great.
Also, like him being a really good and successful poker player also helps with the money thing, I think. Yeah, he's like the World Series of Poker. He plays in the World Series of Poker, right? And I think he's won a substantial amount of money there already. So,
wow, didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No.
Yeah, he's a professional poker player. Yeah. And those results are like public, so there's like 6-figure, amounts for some of those tournaments. Yeah.
You know who else got started that way?
No.
Dieter Meyer of Yellow.
Really?
No
idea.
He's from a very wealthy family in Switzerland, but he was a really successful poker dude in his teens, and then got into the music bit and many other things.
Oh, cool. I don't know. It was the other way around for Albini, I think. He had won his biggest prize money in 2022, I think. So he's really good now at this.
Bless his heart.
Yeah. Anyway, so interesting thing about the whole Pachyderm story. So, and then after that, you left that place and you got to be the engineer at Prince's Paisley Park Studios. So, was that something you were trying to do actively, or did that just appear? Like, was there? How did that happen? Just quickly, how did you end up there?
No, I very, very, very hard worked for this. I really went for that.
You went
Matter
for
of fact,
that?
that's where I wanted to go before I
really?
went to.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay. I just thought there was some opportunity, and you were like of course working hard for it. But
you see, one of the weird things that you find out when you kind of a bit successful in our business, and it kind of goes back to the workshop thing and the secret handshake that people expect, is you get a lot of haters in a weird way, where people go like, "Oh, he's just lucky."
Yeah.
Meaning,
no, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that.
No,
I
know you
like
didn't. No. I'm just trying to explain where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
I know you didn't. I didn't misunderstand you.
Cool.
So people think that he was just lucky. So as though I was at the intersection, I had a big sign on me, German engineer, and Prince just drove by in his limo going, "Oh, German engineer, that's just what I need." Meaning, if they would have stood there, they would have gotten the job. It was just that and that's so both disrespectful and stupid. So I thought about this quite a bit because clearly I have luck. But, there's the definition of luck where Seneca, I think, said that is like, luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
Exactly.
And all the big steps I've taken, virtually all of them, have had the luck part of the opportunity, but were preceded by a lot of preparation. So, for example, the Paisley thing. So I just kind of tried, send a resume there. And for political reasons that I wasn't aware of at the time, the timing was off. And then I did the Pachyderm bit, and I slaved my way through that live thing. And afterwards, there was like a panel discussion at the school that I went to about good assistant engineering. And it was me and a guy named Tom Garneau from Paisley Park, and another guy whose name I forget, another good engineer from around the corner. And so I talked about what's really important, like we said, about communication and supporting people and stuff like that. And then we went to a bar afterwards, and then the Tom said, "Look, I really like what you said. So if you want to go into Paisley, I'll help you. I will help you. It'll take a while, but I'll help you." And he did. So about a year and a half later, I got a job at Paisley. And that was when it was still, Paisley is Prince's studio, just for those who don't know, Paisley Park. And that was when Paisley Park was still open to the public as a rental studio. And so full staff. And there was something called the Prince Pool. So it was like 2 proper engineers and an assistant that were kind of circled in and out because he just, burned people so quickly and worked so much. So one guy was let go, and I was supposed to be the replacement. And then Prince decided somebody else was going to do it, which at the time made me very unhappy. But it turned out to be a really good thing because I had a year, and I was still new. I was just new guy. Generally, I was just a year and a half out of recording school, more or less. I could get used to the place and just kind of, get the run of the joint and see how the technological stuff worked. And I would drop everything for that place, even though they paid me like shit. But even if I had one of the few paying gigs that I had, was hustling for at the time, just small engineering gigs and assisting elsewhere. And even if it was planned, whenever they would call, I would drop whatever. And then Prince let everybody go. After a year, I was supposed to be rolled into this thing again, this Prince Pool thing. Once again, Prince decided, I just need one engineer. And I let everybody else go. I don't want this rental thing anymore. So I thought, fuck this shit. And so he kept the one guy that he was working with at the time, very good engineer called Steve Durkee, and me. I don't know why. He met me like twice, or met me in the sense of we were in the same room, but not like, hey, Hans, how you doing? Not at all. And then nothing happened for like 4 months, with the exception of one gig where I recorded drums for like the side band of his buddy Kirk Johnson, who was at the time his programmer and stuff. And he came in and listened for a bit and just kind of sat next to me. It was the closest I'd been up to that point. And then I got called in another couple months later as I was producing something myself and mixing it.
Oh, wow. At a different studio, right?
At a totally different gig. Local artist called the Beatifics, which turned out to be huge on a local level. It's like, as a producer, indie producer, my breakthrough, in those days, still selling CDs, local radio in America. Just modern radio was going for it afterwards. But anyway, I was starting to mix my own record that I was producing, and they called me, can you assist this guy, Tom Tucker, in a mix? And I dropped my own record and said, you mix it. I'll give you half of my fee. You, studio owner that I trust, mix it. And he did a great job, a guy named Dave Kent. But anyway, I dropped everything and I went to Paisley. The guy I was supposed to assist didn't know anything about this gig, and I didn't have time for it. And Prince comes in and asked me, do you have time for me this week? And I was like, yes, I have time for you this week. And then I had time for him for 4 years. But you see, the reason I'm telling you all this, there is no coincidence in all this.
Yeah.
I made myself available whenever I could, and I wanted this.
Yeah,
so
totally.
There you have it.
And plus, even if somebody else would have been willing to do that and gotten the opportunity and got lucky or whatever, they would not necessarily been able to fulfill and like do the actual job and be good at it and keep the job. That's the whole other thing.
That's the disrespectful part. I'm like, you think that Prince, for some reason, couldn't find anybody else? He just was kind of stuck with my sorry ass. No, fucking hell.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, but I get that all the time. I get that on a regular basis.
Really?
You work somewhere, and you work somewhere, and you do your thing, and you mix, and they go like, this isn't as super special as I thought. Well, clearly you only make coffee there, and whatever.
Yeah, my question was more. Yeah, my question was more because more of like, did you actively want to be at that studio, or was that an opportunity that presented themselves, and then you were like, hell yeah, I'm going to do this? Those are different, things if you seek it out, or if
I know. I really understoed your question. It was a great starting point to just kind of elaborate on a thing that's really important to me. It's like, I don't know what Jill's story is. I don't know why we're bringing it up all the time. But like, for example, this
is great. Similar to yours, actually. She really made herself indispensable and available. And she dropped everything in Germany, went to Canada. She actually, I got to tell you this real quick, because so you know the story, just real quick. She called she was having to do like an internship because of her studying at the university, and she had to do like one practice semester, semester. And so she started Googling studios, and I think she mentioned you recommended a couple in the US, and then she was thinking about, I don't have to do it in Germany. I could probably go over there, and it would be cooler. And so she Googled and found the studio in Canada, the Chukasa Studios, where she is to this day, a commercial studio, and she thought it's cool. And she called them, I think, and they said. And she was asking if she could be an intern, and they said, no, we're not looking for an intern. We need an assistant engineer, but that's a full-time gig, and so, probably not the right thing for you. And she was like, well, I'm just going to drop everything, go there, and like prove to you that I can do this. And she was just confident like that. And they said, yeah, well, we can try, but like no guarantees and stuff. But then she just went and thought, like, I'm just going to make myself indispensable. And she went and did, and she is still working there to this day. And she's obviously not an assistant anymore.
There you go. I mean, that's, I had this one thing where I mixed something at Rudolf Schenker's house, so the guitarist of the Scorpions, and the son of the guy who takes care of his yard, it was interested in stuff, and he came, and he's a death metal dude, and I told him the same story, so he came, watched me for a bit, and he goes like, "What? How would you do this?" I'm like, "Look, you clearly have a passion for something, so why don't you look for the studio where they do that death metal stuff you like so much?" And he did. So he actually went over to Norway, wherever that was. I don't know which studio it is. Forgive me. Yeah. But he got himself a job at I think a bread factory, so he could pay the bills. And he interned, and then moved up, and now he's one of the death metal dudes. There's no osmosis in our job. Every once in a while, you're in the right place at the right time. I have some friends who were fairly unhappy assistants, and then whatever band they were assisting for hated the main engineer or producer and just canned them like, you do it, and then they did a great job and blah.
Yeah, but even then you have to be capable of actually doing it.
Yeah, but like that is very lucky, or that the opportunity is much bigger than the preparation for it.
Yeah.
But even then, like you say, you have to stay at the job. I mean, how,
Yeah.
And with Prince, for example, I was put through the ringer, I would say, for about, I mean, the whole time was very intense, but the ringer was, I mean, I started in July, and then the album came out in November, Emancipation. That whole time was just, oh my God, that was just...
Did you expect it to be like that before you got there? Did you know that he was going to be difficult to work with, so you'd mentally prepared for that,
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, that's something I knew before, because in Minneapolis, clearly, there's a lot of history with Prince. So, I got a lot of interest, even when I got started there. And that was one of the things, once again, I got through the live deal because it was kind of unhappy. Mm-hmm. I knew afterwards that I wanted to do this even if it's not happy. I'm not doing this necessarily to be buddies with the rock stars. I'm doing this because I like doing it. Mm-hmm. And then, once again, good thing that I didn't get the gig right away at Prince in Prince Pool, because I got a really good idea what I was in for. And then when I was actually experiencing it, there was still a level to it that was beyond anything I'd ever done. But I was mentally prepared for the onslaught. Yeah. And the ringer part in the beginning wasn't like the intensity, because it never let up. But it was him not being sure that I knew what I was doing. So there were like a couple of things where like other guys were around. Like on Emancipation, there were two engineers that came to do a couple of songs mixes, and they were established guys, so they kind of he trusted their word. And then there was a problem, and I said, I can do this, and he goes, why would you do that type of stuff? And then he asked the other person, or call that person, I'm like, and he'd go, how do you do this and that? And they'd say the same thing. And that just kind of raised the, okay, he's not useless.
Okay. Awesome. That's very interesting. Like, what I was about to ask, actually, what was it like to, as you said, have time for Prince for 4 years, like in terms of work hours, on demand all the time, I assume, or I don't know, was it like that? Was there like some sort of, Was it like that?
There was kind of there was a rhythm most of the time, but
you had to be available.
Intense rhythm. It was usually early afternoon start, tish, late morning, early afternoon, and then go to the early morning hours.
Okay.
That was
So
it. But
remember,
you'd
like,
have.
sorry.
I had a
Go ahead.
pager.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
For those younger folk that don't remember what that is, before cell phones were all over the place, you had these little thingies, and they had their own phone number, and you could call them then, and then they display the number of the caller, and so you'd actually go to a phone booth or call from home, call that number. So I'd get that call, and it was usually a security dude, and he'd go, "He wants you to come in," and then I'd go in. So,
All right.
I mean, it
And
wasn't
did
until much later that he'd call my house. Yeah.
okay. And was it like were there ever times where you were completely like where it was free time, off work, and or did you always have to be available even when there's a week off or two or something? Were you basically able to go away and enjoy some some free time, or was it like full on all the time?
That was much later where I kind of put my foot
Okay.
down. There were times where I realized, okay, this is not how it's going to work. There's got to be some respect level,
Hmm.
and I'm not going to go into detail here, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there were some moments where I stood my ground, and then that in his mind was like the law, which was I wasn't expected from by
Okay.
me.
Hmm.
But like the last year, 1999, was just fabulous. If I
Hmm.
wouldn't let him down.
Yeah.
I was
Of
very
course.
conscious and very loyal, but I go like, if I leave that week, and I'll tell you a month in advance, that's when I'm going to be gone. But you know what? That was the hardest thing in those days. Is the hardest thing was I didn't know that I had a day off until it was over and I hadn't been called. So it was
Okay.
really tough on my people. But that's the biggest luck in my
Hmm.
life that I found my lady Patty Boff, who I met the same day I got my pachyderm gig. Good day
Oh
all
wow.
around.
Good day.
And she, so she was my girlfriend, and instantly I was gone for a week, whatever, and she'd still stick with me and do all that stuff. And to this day, I mean, it's much easier now, but I work a lot. And she's
Of
aware
course.
when I say I'll be down in a half an hour, she takes it times three, and that's about realistic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
so that was the tough
Okay.
thing. That was the tough thing.
Cool.
It wasn't plannable, but that was
Hmm.
part of the deal. It was okay. It wasn't
Hmm.
a job for life, and I knew that too. I knew I wasn't going to
Hmm.
be there for 20 years. And that's a big
Yeah.
difference, between him and Peter Gabriel, for example. There's people at Peter Gabriel's joint um, that have been there for 40 years, and they're really enthusiastic and loyal and well
Yeah.
treated,
Yeah.
and that works as well. Whereas with Prince, I think the longest anybody was ever there was 10 years.
Oh wow.
And those were usually people that, in
Hmm.
those intense positions,
Yeah. Yeah.
like engineering positions, that lived like him,
Hmm.
that didn't have a family and just lived for the job. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have there been like creative aspects to that gig with Prince that you enjoyed, or was it like purely like making sure that his vision, you can fulfill his vision basically, or yeah, that's the question basically. Like, was it more
That's
like
no
working out?
contradiction. Yeah, that's no
No.
contradiction to
Okay.
me. You see,
Okay. Okay.
I was there to make his flow possible, and I have to say,
Hmm.
I mean, the one thing I regret is that I didn't quit half a year before the time I did, because
Hmm.
that was the point when it became
Oh, you quit.
redundant.
So you quit basically, or
I was fired and I quit.
okay.
That's a good long story, which
Yeah.
another
Anyway.
time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
but I did quit, yes.
Yeah.
Or let me say it more neutral. If it would have ended a year,
Hmm.
I should have left on top,
Yeah.
knowing fully well that it wasn't. I really knew it wasn't going to get any better
Hmm.
than that.
Hmm.
And anyway, it was like
Yeah.
it became redundant, and then all of a sudden it wasn't as special anymore. That's where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
And if it's not special anymore, it was just too tough a job.
Hmm.
So while it was special, it was great. And I mean, that was like my first really big gig. When I started out, from my experience, I really didn't have any business being Prince's engineer. But that's just kind of how he liked it. He liked to mold young guys rather than having to
Hmm.
deal with the preconceptions of established people, whom
Yeah.
he still hired from time to time to do specific things. But just as
Yeah.
a guy around, he liked young guys. So for me, I figured, okay, that's how that works. That's just how rock star business works. I just didn't know any better. And then as soon as the second rock star afterwards approached, I was like, okay, that's different. And on any level, it was different. From the fluency of the, the musical approach, that guy never practiced. I mean, that's the main difference. It's like even really good people I know go like, should we? Never. It was always like, do it differently. But it was never like, how do I do it? It was like, should I do it this way or should I do it this way? So that was just to me, okay, that's just how you do it.
All right. Interesting. Yeah, let's actually, that's a good segue actually to the Peter Gabriel thing now. So you say completely different experience in many ways. But I assume you didn't, or maybe you did, but I assume you didn't start with the 3D thing there, right? Or was that actually the first thing you did? But no, because that wasn't the thing like that back then. So you returned to Germany in 2001, I think, right? Or 2000,
yep,
basically.
Correct.
And was that when you started working with Peter Gabriel, or was there like
just now.
No.
We've been working together for a year. Yeah, this is a fairly recent deal.
All right. Okay. So, So what happened then in those 20 years between Paisley Park and then the Peter Gabriel thing?
Well, in the beginning, lots of learning things as well. I came back to Germany, and for let's say the first 7-8 months, I was just super busy because people were really, really curious. The Prince guy and how that works and stuff.
Has it been Has it been exclusively Prince for those 4 years, or did you like also work with some other people or make some connections outside of that? Probably no time for that, right?
I did some on the side. I did
really?
some indie stuff on the side.
Okay.
A band called the Vandalius, album called Buzz Bomb, very good. If you like indie stuff, if you like power pop stuff, it's a band called Magnatone, fabulous
cool.
indie band.
Make sure to put all of that in the show notes, Wayne, so people can check that out. Thank you.
Yes, it's tough to find. Vandalius are on Spotify, but Magnatone aren't, and the Beatifics I mentioned earlier aren't either, which is a real shame because that was a fun little Beatlesque power poppy type thing. So that was the main thing, and then clearly with Prince, I worked with the guys that worked with Prince, and that's how Sheryl Crow and No Doubt and all that stuff happened. Chaka Khan, Larry Graham. We didn't only just do Prince stuff, but he'd collaborate with other people, and he'd produce them or help them with their stuff, or whatever. When I came back to Germany, though, so I did that, and a couple of insights came around. One was like, hey, it's really different, and I can tell you this, it's different in how people hear stuff, especially at the time. So one of the things that was current at the time was that Daft Punk album with One More Time and stuff on it, and so friends of mine who were into similar music, indie people, like rock people, alternative rock people, told me, "Oh, that's a great record." And I bought that record, and I listened to it, and I thought it was the biggest piece of shit I'd ever heard. Boring fucking Europop crap. And I put it into my extensive CD shelf, never to reappear type stuff. And then 4 years later or something, I was home alone, and my family was gone, and I was doing something boring like taxes or whatever. And I figured, okay, I'll get some of the lost children of my CD collection out and give them another chance. And I popped in that CD of the Daft Punk CD. I thought, that is awesome. What an awesome record. So they didn't change, but my approach to listening to music changed, and that is local.
Very interesting.
So one of the things I found out, people would hire me for two things that I didn't really think about much, because I don't care why they hire me. They must have their reasons. But one was like, I'm a rock band. You did Prince. Do my garage rock record. I was like, how does that work? That was number one. Number two was people who really liked Prince would hire me, and then neither one of those two would work really. And then I realized, I get hired because I worked with a famous guy.
People are curious.
So they figured,
basically,
since he's great, whatever they do must be great if they work with me. That was mistake number one. That was the garage rock band one. And number two, even the guys that like Prince and knew what I had actually done, which, a lot of people who like Prince, like Purple Rain and Sign of the Times, but they have no clue what I actually did. They didn't want to sound like Prince. They liked stuff like Jamiroquai at the time. So there was a lot of learning for me, which was not happy for a while. And then I figured out, okay. And then I reestablished myself as somebody who did good sound with that experience rather than as a copy of that experience. But that took some time. I totally underestimated what a big step that was. And then I got into various cool places. So the first couple of years, I think most of the zeros, I worked with a fellow named Musti. I actually talked to him earlier. He's a friend to this day. I don't know if you know him, but Musti is this guy. Well, a lot of people don't. So Musti did his biggest thing was "Sex Bomb" by Tom Jones, that he wrote and produced, and a ditty called "Horny," which was huge, and many others. He's a really good producer, and so we did everything from remixes to his own stuff, over his own stuff, to producing stuff together for local bands and stuff. So there was a lot of stuff until around 2009, and then I got into the Scorpions camp and just did lots of things. But those were the two main deals.
Cool.
And then I got into the 3D stuff much later, 2018-ish, and really got into it. And so Peter Gabriel was looking for somebody to do 3D music for headphones, which was my main thing. My first thing wasn't Atmos. It was like making it specifically for headphones, making it sound great in headphones. And he asked a friend of his, an acquaintance of mine as well, a guy named Andreas Sennheiser, who's one of the Sennheiser owners. And he said, well, if you want to do this right, there's this guy, Buff. You should contact him. And then I had booked time at Real World for my own project as a producer before. So his people knew me, and I got along with them really well. So Peter sent me one of those great emails of my life. It was like, hey, I'm Peter Gabriel. I want to do 3D. Can you help me? He's a very eloquent fellow. It was a nice email. But he had his two guys in CC. And one of them being his head engineer went, it's Buff, man. I know I'm going to fucking on. So we started having a conversation and just having a couple of Zoom meetings as four of us. And then I had booked more time there anyways. And then me and his team, we did like some experimental binaural things. And just got more and more into it. And then Peter said, you know what, let's work on my stuff. Which was great too. I should tell you this because it's a great story, and that is totally anti-Prince too. So with Prince, it was very, very, he's very, very protective of his music. So I didn't have a combination to the Fabled Vault. If we needed something from there, he'd go down there, open it for me, and somebody would there be watching me. He'd trust me in the end. He really would. Felt very trusted, but he almost apologized for doing this, and I said, no, that's fine, because we'll both be comfy, there will be no misunderstanding. And he wouldn't, even if he would send it to like other people, he would have me make a cassette at really low volume so they couldn't bootleg it. So he was very protective of it. Okay. So, okay, fast forward a couple of years, many, many years, 20 years to Pete Gabriel thing, and he booked me for a week. And right away he stood me up, which was communicated to me the week before, and I said, no matter, because he stood me up for Brian Eno. And I said, you know what? I'd stand myself up for Brian Eno if I could. I really would. So I showed up there, and getting used to the room and all that stuff. They had their Atmos room, the Red Room. And then I talked to his lovely assistant, Faye, and said, is there anything I should listen to before he shows up in 2 days, just to get used to something, fully expecting to nah. He doesn't want new guys to listen to his music without him around. But she went like, I'll ask them when they take a break in the Eno thing, which was in London. We were out at Real World Studios. So she did, and she comes back with this hard drive with the entire album and goes, he said, you can do whatever you want. And I was like, so I listened to the roughs of virtually everything they've been working on.
Wow.
Made notes about it and just started with the one that intrigued me most for 3D. And then he showed up 2 days later, and we just been having fun ever since. But that's just a whole different approach, you know. He just so refreshing. I really like that guy, you know. Fabulous dude.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like it. Have you been to Real World before that, or like have you worked there before working with Peter Gabriel?
That's like I said earlier. I had booked it. I had been there several times. So this wonderful artist I work with, Ada Morg, the last album we did, we had put together this wonderful band of British musicians, and we just brought in some basic sketches around the idea of the elements. Musical sketches, just like little licks or bass ideas, and then we got the band to jam on it. Great jazz musicians from London, and they would jam on it for like half an hour, 40 minutes, whatever. And I cut them together, just kind of this is how it would work, maybe. And all these maybes turned out to be the final songs. And then Ada and I wrote melodies and lyrics on top of it, and then we kind of rounded it up. Beautiful record, jazzy type stuff. Anyway, we did this at Real World as well. So that kind of happened parallel. We went there once or twice during the in between lockdown time, which would be a podcast in itself about the immense possibilities of testing and sitting around in semi-quarantine and stuff like that. But anyway.
Yeah, totally. Like, do you remember the first time walking into? I just have to ask that. Do you remember the first time walking into Real World and like what that experience was like? Because people, if you're not aware, just Google that studio. I think there's even a virtual. I don't know if it's still online, but there used to be a virtual like 365-degree tour that you could do of the studio on Google, so you can actually virtually walk through the studio and have a look at all the rooms from all kinds of different angles and stuff. And this is like a spectacular studio. I've never been there, but just from doing that virtual tour and looking at those pictures, and it's about as crazy as it gets. And so do you remember walking in there for the first time, and what was that like for you?
I do remember walking in there for the first time, but I don't know. I'm kind of out of the fanboy age. I have to say, walking into Paisley for the first time was a bit.
I expected that actually.
Much bigger deal. And but I should say I'm a very big Peter Gabriel fan, and he actually, he's always been kind of cutting edge with technology. And at some point, the cutting edge of technology were actually CD-ROMs, which is a format nobody remembers. It's a CD you would pop into your computer, and then you could do little tasks or whatever. And there was one that he did in 90 whatever, 3-ish, 4-ish maybe. And I bought that. I have it to this day. And part of the deal is a virtual tour. You actually walk to those rooms, and you can click on things and doors open and little videos play. And I was aware of the places where I'm going with this. But I mean, the last time I was really kind of when I walked into a studio was when I walked into Abbey Road for the first time, and that was in 2011. And I'm such a that got me into recording is my Beatle fanness. So going there was just like, whoa. But even there, after about an hour of just kind of trying to scrape the Beatles sweat of the instruments they used or whatever, it was just a great studio. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about me doing stuff. Yeah. And I have to say, Real World is an amazing environment for doing stuff. They're really, really cool. And the setting is great. I actually like the smaller studio better because it is a really homey place. It's called the Wood Room, and it's not quite as distracting because you're in that big thing, and you have this just serene view of the lake that it's built in, with a freaking swan swimming by, and the heron perching itself on this windowsill, and they're like, "How do you work in that?" You're like, all the time you just kind of, you're your own screensaver, and you just forget what you're doing.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Yeah, it totally makes sense. So you got there again then and this time for Peter Gabriel or with Peter Gabriel to work on this stuff. I don't know if you've done all the 3D things at Real World actually, or if it's a lot of it you can do wherever you are. I don't know what that is like. But you started that working relationship. Now, the most interesting thing to me and to us probably in the audience is the difference between turning something that has already been produced for stereo and mixed for stereo into like something that works on Atmos or some sort of immersive format versus actually making music for that format, and then also making sure that it works on headphones and is not just like a bad compromise and you would actually need the room for the real experience. So that's the most interesting part to me, because all I've done so far is I've dabbled with it on headphones. I don't have an Atmos room. I've been to Atmos studios though, and the difference between listening in an Atmos room and headphones was so big that it was kind of headphones impressive, yeah, but not the same thing. And also the stuff that I've listened to was clearly not, most of it at least, was clearly not made for that format. So the stereo mixes actually almost always sounded better to me. And yeah, so to sum that all up into one question, like, what's the difference between turning a song that's been made for stereo into an immersive format versus making music for 3D, as you call it, or any of those 3D formats?
Wow. Well, to explain it from stereo terms, so the similarity that I always try to put up so people understand what the problem is if you take, for example, early stereo, pop stereo, if you take Beatles stereo from 1965, it was like the whole band is there and the vocals is there. That's not stereo. It's just not mono. It's just some weird way of putting shit places. And then fast forward, you take Money by Pink Floyd, and their stereo is part of the composition almost. He didn't compose it for stereo necessarily, but it starts with like the sound of money things moving, and then the band starts, and some of it is recorded for stereo, like the drums. Not like Beatles stuff. There's one Beatles song that is not, where the drums aren't mono, which is the solo on Abbey Road. Everything else, every drum recorded on any Beatles song is mono. It's one track only. So the drums are all of a sudden recorded stereo. So there's natural movement in that. And then there's reverb on it that is stereo. And then in some point in the song, the reverb goes away. So they're playing with the size of the stereo. That is part of the creative expression of the song itself. Now, it's exactly the same thing with 3D. There's, it's, to me, it's, I don't know, it's exhilarating at the same, and depressing at the same time. Exhilarating because you can only do better. You can do really cool stuff. Depressing is because when I listen to the spatial playlist on Apple, whatever, fucking hell, if I listen to 50 things and 47 are shit, then that's a good quota. The 3 great things make me happy, and everything else is not bad necessarily, but it's just repotted stereo. And I go like, what's the point of that? I mean, but you got to start somewhere. To give you an answer, how I should tell you how I got to it. So I listened to this headphone thing only, and then I figured, okay, if you expect people to listen to 3D in headphones, you should make it for headphones. It shouldn't be a compromise. It should be it. So I found various ways on how to use the very limited tools, the so-called binauralizers, to make really cool, headphone-y type stuff in 3D. And one thing, I can tell you that I did is I used them like you use compressors. When you use a compressor in your session, I have hundreds in my plugin folder that came with the various bundles that I have, whatever. And they all pretty much do the same thing. The only reason I use different ones is because the colorization, the extra sound they bring to the table. So I do the same thing with binauralizers. In the same session, I use 4 or 5. So I use that sound through that one because it sounds best on it. Or this makes it sound bigger. It sounds crap on something punchy. Make it bigger. Or I leave stuff stereo. Even if you have a stereo mix, not everything's stereo. Lots of things are mono. I just punch you in the middle. So why wouldn't I do the same thing with headphones? I have stereo in my head. I put stuff around it with different binauralizers. So that's the basic approach.
Mm-hmm.
Then came that Atmos bit with Apple. And that kind of put an end to that, because if you put stuff in Atmos, at least with Apple using their own binauralizer at this point, I have no choice but to use a one-size-fits-all binauralizer. So that's a bit unfortunate, but I take it as a positive thing anyways, because at least all of a sudden now 3D music has a platform. So I'll deal with that later. I'll just postpone that speaker versus binauralizer thing to a certain extent. So now what? So now we can do all this stuff, and a lot of people just do the Atmos bit because they get on the Apple playlist, and that includes record companies. I know people who do an okay job who get a lot of work from record companies because they're cheap. So they do a so-called stem mix. They get like stems, a certain amount of stems from the stereo guys, and then they mix them somewhere, which to me has two inherent problems. One, to me, the 3D thing is not a mixing process. Like I just said, it's a production and arrangement process. You fill the space you have with music. You guide attention like you do in a stereo arrangement, probably less purposefully, but nonetheless, that's what you do when you arrange. So it's not just a mixing. It's not repositioning stereo. What's the point of that? That's just a gimmick. That's problem number one, the creative one. The other one is that nobody understands what this is all about, because no record company would ever say to any artist they signed, so let's see who's going to mix it for stereo. Oh, there's a guy who has 2 speakers and is going to do it for 200. They'd never do that. Well, that's exactly what they do with Atmos. They just want to get it over with and get it through, and then, put it on the frickin' playlist as one of the 47 that don't suck, but why, Then there's the stuff, and that's the rarest, where you make music specifically for it, where you go into the studio and you go like, I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but it'll be for all over the place. So I've done like a couple of songs for that, my own and with other people also at Real World. And then the third one, and this is what I do with Peter Gabriel, is an augmented version. So clearly he's worked on his stuff for a very, very long time. And then I come in and he wants to do a 3D thing. So he gives me the drive with his stuff, and I get the same session that the stereo mixers get. There are 2 stereo mixers, both amazing people, Chad Blake and Spike Stent.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We all start from scratch, and we can do whatever the hell we want. He'll, and I didn't trust this in the beginning when I started working with him, but it's for real. He wants you to do whatever it is you bring to the table, and he'll call you back and won't resent it. That's the best part. He won't resent if you do something that he thinks is not good. He'll just say, okay, we'll try something else. So anyway, I start from the same thing, and then I listen to it, and I go like, how do I fulfill the creative vision of this in 3D? And for example, the first one I did, or the first one that was released, is a song called Panopticon, which you can, he's currently releasing songs every month. So you can find them on Apple Music and anywhere where Atmos is streamed, so not on Spotify. The inside mixes are the Atmos mixes. So the first one that was released in January is called Panopticon. And there's a pre-chorus, chorus, tough to say which is which, that is based on like acoustic guitars. So I got this song, and clearly that's the basic thing. And I was like, how am I going to get 2 acoustic guitars to fill the room and tell the story like they're supposed to? So I said, I'd like to record more acoustic guitars. And they went like, okay. So I got a buddy of mine, or somebody that's on their label as well, Stu McCullum, and his engineer, Katie May, who's a fabulous guitarist as well, and we recorded them 6 more times. And all of a sudden now when you listen to it, it's better because it fulfills the creative promise at the spot. So that's what I do. I get these things, I go through it, and depending what the song is, clearly there's a difference. If it's an experimental thing, I can do tons of things even without adding stuff. But any one of those songs, I've added bits here and there, very subtly sometimes, but just to make sure the creative promise is fulfilled in the round, all around you. So that is, I think, is where that's what I'm trying to bring to artists at this point, where I'm like going, I don't need to take over your process, but I can take you a step further. We can augment your thing. And I firmly believe once people hear what you can do with the space creatively by just rethinking your arrangement process a bit, that'll also totally change their their production and composition way of approaching things, process. That's really going to totally change that approach, because all of a sudden they go, oh, I can work with this. I can guide attention this way. I can go from just mono and go,
Yeah.
just we talked about Nirvana earlier, that whole like be quiet, get loud, be quiet, get loud
Yeah,
thing that
that's
they
the
stole
thing.
from the
Yeah.
Pixies. It's like you can do that the same way from you can have enormous impact. And once you do something like that, then stereo is never better.
Okay, that's very interesting. And can you give us some some examples, maybe for like, let's say a normal like standard rock band? You have like guitars, bass, drums, vocals.
Uh-huh.
Some examples of what you can do, because people just think, of course, still think in stereo. Like we have kick, snare, bass up the middle, and the vocal, and then we have guitars left and right, and the overheads are stereo, and that's pretty much it. Like, what are some in that scenario? Like, what are some things you could do in 3D? Probably, for example.
Let me give you an example. So there's this German
Yeah.
band. It's like a hip-hoppy outfit called Die Fantastischen Vier, the Fantastic Four. And they made an album where they re-recorded some of their finest songs, greatest hits, with their wonderful touring band in the country of Liechtenstein. So it's called the Liechtenstein Tapes. And they took me along to put up some extra mics along with the capable people at the studio where we were. So I put up extra stuff for specific things as I felt necessary. So I decked out the room with the room mics. So, for example, for the drums, I not only had the stereo stuff that was recorded, and I also used in stems from the very capable stereo mixer, but I had the room sounds that are recorded with it, so I could make it bigger if it was supporting the creative vision. As we all know, room is not necessarily always a good thing in rock productions. Then there was a percussionist that had tons of percussion set up in the round, right? And usually you have individual mics and stuff like that. And I had like a specific mic setup that was on top of it. So if he played something right back, that's how I'd record it. So in the room, in the mix, in the end, in the final 3D thing, all of a sudden he's moving, but he's moving naturally because that's just kind of how it's set up. So the next step clearly would be, next time when you actually produce for it, where do I want to play it? It's not just so it fits around me, but like, where do I put what? That'll be the next step, but that hasn't happened yet. Stuff like the Leslie. I wouldn't just use 2 mics, I'd use 4. So it really totally around you, stuff like that. And do extra overdubs that, for example, there were horns. There was a horn section, 3-piece. I'd asked them to double their stuff for me twice. And like in a rock environment, for example, I did the Scorpions album, I co-produced the Rock Believer album. Very fine Atmos versions. And I didn't know it was supposed to be in 3D in the end. That was, right when we were mixing it, that whole Atmos Apple record company packed with the devil thing established itself. So they came up, we need Atmos. I'm like, you tell me this now. But since I was a producer, I clearly could access stuff that usual mixers can access. So, for example, when I get a chorus would get really big, I'd just take from the other stuff we recorded, I make not just doubles but quadruples of guitars, and so that would get bigger that way. I put stuff around me in the round,
Yeah.
And I should say, that was clearly produced for stereo, and the genre rock isn't particularly spacey, happy-go-lucky, and I would say about the third of the songs are better in Atmos, and the rest is worse, which is good enough. And because I think, as we progress on the creative 3D route, where it should be at the end is that you choose stereo 3, whatever, depending on how you want to present your song. So you can have an album with, let's say, 2 mono songs, 4 stereo songs, and 10 Atmos songs. Not
Wow,
because it's a way of presentation of extra, but because it's a great way of making music. That's where it needs to end in the end. That's my mission
cool.
in this, and that's why I get to do all the fun stuff. Yeah.
That's really cool. What, like, do you think then that now the typical, small self-recording band, like our audience, self-recording artists, musicians, people just starting out, should they worry about or like think about the whole 3D thing actually, or should they just? Is that something that's relevant, or is it only relevant for like bigger productions at the moment? Is this something you can actually learn or do at home to a degree, or
Totally.
What are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Totally, yeah. I really got into it, and I do a lot of reamp. So in my augmented approach, even when I do stereo, I got something stereo. For example, if I reamp a bass, and I just pop that not even through a bass amp, but like through a subwoofer and an active speaker, and then put even just two mics in the room, and then put those mics behind me. All of a sudden, my bass level and the depth is just enormous. And I do that at here, where I'm sitting right now, in my living room, which is a very small living room. So I wait till everybody's fucked off.
Yeah.
I put down the shutters because there's a playground next door, and then I just reamp it. So you can do that wherever. And that was my first approach when I was still, before the Atmos craze really took off. But like when I was doing this for headphones, my thinking was, how do I do this so everybody can do it? And everybody can do it, Most or several DAWs have now the Atmos thing even wrapped into their structure, and I'm sure Pro Tools will do it at some point too. But even there, it's not hard. You just need the extra renderer. Even stuff like Ableton, which is reluctant. There's a great plugin called the Dolby Atmos Composer, where you can kind of go behind the system and still do it. So anybody can do it at their house, can do it on a with headphones, on a train, whatever you want to do. It's just a fun, it's just creative. It's just awesome. You could do more stuff. You don't even need a huge thing, it's just about space. If you do a great ballad, you can just, Adele could kick ass just with a piano in that. Or to give you an example, how do you do this? So when the Peter Gabriel thing kind of took off, and after I had started on the first two songs, more things were recorded. And he recorded some piano. Both him and a friend of his, Tom, recorded piano for a couple songs in a really nice big space. So he took me along so I could put up extra mics. Or when they recorded strings, I put a basic recording array, a mic array in the middle that kind of builds a sonic picture of the strings as they are. So kind of the mics that I put in there make you be like right in front of the conductor in the middle of the orchestra. So that was the basis then of my sound later. So, that's really easy stuff. The only thing you need more, even at home, is you will need more tracks.
Yeah.
Because if you record that stuff, and you can hide it and then even use it for your stereo stuff, and you just have to put it into folders, and you have to make your peace with a lot of tracks. The biggest Peter Gabriel session, including all my aux tracks and my setups, 720 tracks.
Yep.
So it does triple if you're doing it right, you triple your track count. But who cares at this point?
I love your perspective and the whole approach to the headphone thing, because most people that I've talked to so far have been like, oh yeah, it's like headphones are this bad compromise and nobody has an Atmos room really, but you need one. And then like that whole conversation, and hearing you say like basically, what if headphones are not the compromise, but the thing that we make this for and that most people have, and maybe we can even make it on headphones because that just makes sense if that's what people also listen on. That's a whole different perspective, and I think it makes so much sense. And I really love that, and that makes it accessible, and that will, if a lot of people try that and play around with that, I just can't wait to hear what comes from that and how it evolves over the next couple of years and the creative things we're going to hear then. So this sounds pretty exciting to me, and I just don't see ever like people installing these Atmos systems at home or properly. That just won't. It has to be headphones. Like there's no.
No. Actually, the other thing that's in development is smart speakers.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not just talking those expensive lawn things, but I'm in the very lucky position that I get to have lots of conversations right now with people that develop stuff,
Of course.
because they're all looking, we're in the weird situation that there's tons of stuff actually to listen to that stuff on, some type of quality level, and no content. So they're really interested in people, actually wanting to do it and having ideas. This works, this doesn't. And I've seen some things they're going to blow people's minds and aren't like
Mm-hmm.
$4,500 audiophile things, but there'll be like a combination of what you have anyways.
Okay.
There's stuff in the works. There's tons of it, man. It'll be all over. I mean, the next step will clearly be, and currently just in the really expensive ones, is the car, which is, you sitting in a fixed spot for a long time, and you can really set up how that works. And I've been in a bunch of cars now, and I've signed very thick NDAs, so I'm not going to tell you which ones.
Yeah.
But awesome, man. It's going to be, some of it just really cool ideas on how to both get like the 4 people in the car properly served with punch and being in an Atmos environment. So it's coming, man. It's there.
Okay.
And,
awesome. Can't wait.
And, since I'm on technology, I think the one thing that's really difficult about the Atmos bit is that people don't realize technically, Dolby Atmos specifically and a bunch of others is like, it's not like a bounce like you're used to, like where, okay, this is how I like it, and then I bounce it, and that's how it'll be forever. No, it's like a package of stuff. So you put so-called objects. So you put your objects in there, and what's in the package is the sound, and then whatever direction you gave it. So like in the movie theater, if Superman needs to go from there to there, Superman sound and the direction are in the package. Meaning something on the other end where the package is delivered is going to measure the room. Clearly this is made for movie theaters. And no matter if it's 22 speakers or 5 or headphones, Superman is supposed to always fly from there to there. The downside of this approach is it's always different. So as soon as the unpacking mechanism changes, the music you made sounds differently, and that's pretty unbearable. So where I think this should all go, and I hope it will, is that you will have some packaging for, let's say, your phone. And so you make a mix, if you want to, that is just for headphones. So it's perfect for headphones. And then you give the data package for whatever else. So you deliver all these things in a stream, and then your phone will figure out, he's wearing headphones. And it'll switch to the headphone mix. That is exactly how I want it to be. It'll sound better too. It'll sound much better than any one-size-fits-all binauralization you'll ever hear. And then if it's stereo, it switches to the stereo mix. You know what I'm saying? Rather than every time that package being reassembled, because that's really what it is. You have to realize it. So it's a package with like an IKEA assembly thing, and then the thing at the end goes, "Ooh, okay, I'll put this together for this room."
Yeah,
not ideal.
Yeah.
So tons of stuff in the pipeline for things to get better, and headphones, in my mind, actually being not only the most obvious, but also the easiest, because you're always in the sweet spot. Look at us, all 3 of us. We're right in between where we're supposed to be. I'm not sure if you guys maybe have left and right reverse. That may be the worst thing that happened.
Nope.
But other
than
that,
on the left.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, exactly, totally.
You're in the sweet spot. You can take them wherever you want, and it'll work just fine.
And you're right. Like that's probably where that's exactly what my experience was so far. Is that I've listened to Atmos stuff on studio headphones, different kinds, on the AirPods, and then the weird like Apple 3D thing where you move your head but things stay in the same position. Like you can even do that with podcasts. I listened to a podcast with you actually yesterday where I had that accidentally on, and I was like cooking and I turned my head around and like, why is Hans on the left now? And I was, and it's the Apple 3D thing.
I can't help it.
Yeah. So I've listened to that, and then I've listened in a proper Atmos room, which was pretty impressive. And then I listened on my Sonos soundbar thing that is Atmos compatible, but it's just a soundbar. And like, of course, widely different experiences and mixes. And so that was my main concern. Like, how is this ever going to be one mix that I can enjoy wherever I listen? It's like
one thing at a time. You see, for me, I'm an optimist, and the cool thing about the current situation is that before this whole Atmos Apple thing happened, I always got three questions like, how's it going to get to people? How are they going to hear it?
Yeah.
And where's the music for it? And now the first two questions have been temporarily answered. It's streamed, it's with headphones mainly, and now I can focus on making good music for it. And I'm totally convinced that if people latch on to the creative part of it, then the rest will follow.
Yeah.
As soon as Taylor Swift, or the Taylor Swift we don't know yet, is gonna make music just for that, you won't even know how quickly they're all going to change their approach if that's what people want to hear.
Yeah. Agreed. Awesome. Well, let's get to some of our listener questions, if you don't mind.
Excellent.
And then we can wrap it up. Want to be respectful of your time, of course. Final thing before we do that, your masterclass, we just have to bring it up again. Is that going to be about the 3D thing, or is that going to be something completely different? What are you going to do at Studio Szene in Hamburg?
My Studio Szene in Hamburg is we're all gonna have headphones on, and I'm gonna talk exactly about we're gonna talk about 3D for headphones, kind of how my thought processes were, and then I'm gonna show some actually Peter Gabriel songs that are out at that point, and just the difference in sound through different binauralization. So just to show you what you can do with headphones and at home, very important. That's the ticket. You can do all of this at home. You don't need 12 speakers. You don't need the Dolby guy to show up to measure that for you. If you do it right, you can do it at your home. And as it sounds on your headphones, that's how it will sound elsewhere. Just buy maybe 2 more headphones just to compare things. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you brands, but I would if you asked me there.
Yeah. Awesome. So I can't wait for that. That's going to be so cool. Can't wait to experience that. And yeah, you guys, please get your ticket and be there too. Again, it's studioszene.de/tickets, and the link is going to be in the show notes. All right. So to the questions. The first one was, the government have announced a new law. There are too many microphones and we're sick of it. From now on, there's just going to be one type of microphone and that's it. They're saying. They come to you for advice. What microphone do you choose to be the only microphone that can ever be manufactured and used from now on?
I'd shoot them all.
Bring down the government, right?
Bring down the fucking government. No, I'm not conspiracy guy. That's exactly the wrong question to ask me, because there's no such thing. I think that's one of the big problems in a lot of studios, because they figure, okay, we buy a bunch of mics because you need more than one, and then we buy the microphone, which is...
Then everything's going to sound amazing.
Yes, everything's just going to be so great. No. So you see, when I work with singers for the first time, I always do like some type of like press conference thing. I have a pretty good idea what might work on them, and so I put 3-4 mics up, and then I let them sing a verse and a chorus on each one of them. Then we compare, and I would tell you 50-50 if it's going to be some dynamic mic versus the 12 grand tube mic that's there. It's not one size fits all. So that question, that would be the dumbest government thing ever. And by the way, I should not, I hope I'm not insulting anybody, but this whole idea of one size fits all is just not my thing at all, ever.
Yeah.
One of the things totally I schlep around with me to do my 3D stuff, I schlep around some very nice, very specific Sennheiser mics, like 8050s, which are super cardioids. Very expensive. But then I have a sack of Behringer B5s, because you can, they cost like whatever, 60 a pop. Yeah. If one tanks, who cares? And they're nice Omni mics, and they're great to set up for a specific room thing I do. So I'm not going there.
Yeah.
Good. I love that.
Thank you for that answer. By the way, that's why also people have mixed opinions on that. That's why I love the slate modeling thing that I'm talking into right now, just for quick, doing shootouts. And then if I want to pick the real thing, I can, but sometimes I just use that, but just options. Yeah. Anyway.
If that's the sponsor, I agree with you. Otherwise, I wouldn't.
No, it's not.
I would never buy one of those things. I'd buy 5 other ones at first. Yeah.
Yeah,
Never.
that's some. I know mixed opinions there, but I just like the flexibility. I'm not pretending this sounds like the real thing, and I have some of the real things, but or I used to have, but
But
I kind
that's
of like it
that's
anyway.
legit. I think the thing that bugs me about it is that they pretend like it's five of those things. It's
Oh
like
no, it's not.
plugins, when I have three plugins that pretend to be Pultecs,
Yeah.
Pultec EQs, and none of them sound totally like
Hmm.
a Pultec. But they all sound great. They have their own thing. So if you
The
look at
two.
it as their own thing, totally legit.
Yeah, yeah,
But
totally.
I do this. This is actually it's a fun workshop. Every once in a while, I get to do mixed workshops at Abbey
Uh
Road.
huh. Uh huh.
So what I do is I let the guys run the joint and just get any of the old stuff that they want to use, and then we compare it to the plugin.
Hmm.
And it's never exactly the same. You can get it pretty close, but they're
Yeah,
both good. And a lot of times the plugin
yeah,
has clear advantages.
yeah.
So
But then again, two different Poltecs from like 5 years apart or so also don't sound the same. So
correct,
no.
correct.
Anyway, are you in the box, by the way? Sorry, I need to get back to the listeners' questions, but are you completely working in the box when you
Yeah.
mix, or do you? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Great.
Yeah.
All right. So, but yeah, love the answer, and then that's actually a great segue. Next question is your favorite stock plugin.
I have to say I've replaced most stock plugins. I used to just use the 7 EQ thing on. I'm a Pro Tools guy.
Yeah.
The 7 EQ thing that was fine.
All right.
And
Q7.
I guess the Bomb Factory being part of Pro Tools, that would be the Pultec, actually. The Pultec, not the mid one, but the high and low
Mm,
one, the
mm.
1A.
Cool.
Um,
Awesome.
but I've replaced most of my stock things with specific plugins, and I'm also wary of my moods. There's always one that is totally the best thing I ever had, and then 6 months later,
Uh,
I turn it off and I go like, oh. Right now, it's, for example, the RC Color. I love that thing, or Sketch Cassette,
oh yeah.
which I use, and I'm positive that's not going to be
Yeah.
around anymore in a year and a half or so.
Yeah.
Even though
Right.
they're
Right.
great, but right now
Yeah.
I'm just in love.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that could be the answer to the next question, which is favorite fancy plugin, not stock, but any.
Currently, I have to say I resisted the Fab Filter stuff for a long time
Okay.
because I figured, why would I buy something for 150 that I have as a stock plugin?
Yeah.
But the way I get to use their EQ
Mm.
opened a whole new avenue of using equalization for me, and that's really, I think, put like a
Cool.
5% thicker layer of whipped cream on my mixes. What else do I like a lot? I mean, I just I really like. What I just told you.
Hmm.
I do a lot of parallel this and that, and pretty much my go-to parallel limiter is the Chandler, usually UAD version off the Softube version, but depending, yeah. So that's really something that's been around for a long time.
Cool. Thank you. If you could work with any artist, either from history or the present, who would it be?
I've applied, and I think by now he knows this, but he didn't. I have never told him. I've applied at Real World Studios even when I was working for Prince.
Oh wow.
Because I thought, wow, I didn't. Maybe the listeners don't know, but like Real World is not only Peter Gabriel's studio, whom I really like as a musician, but it's also the home of his record company, which does world music. I'm not a huge world music fan per se, but I like
Mm-hmm.
interesting music, and it's all interesting. And I thought, as an engineer, wow, what a better place to hone your craft than at a place where everybody from the world comes around and does your thing. So I'm already working with the people that I
Wow.
that I really want to work with. I guess the one guy that's still missing is Paul McCartney, because
Because
he's just so mother's milk, And I guess one of the things you learn when you work with famous people that you like as a fan is you don't know them at all until you meet them.
yeah.
And with Paul McCartney, I probably know more about his kids than he does in terms of like in terms of like CV stuff, birthdays and stuff, he probably doesn't know Yoko Ono's birthday. I do, that type of stuff. So it's kind of a blessing in disguise. That would be a great moment, considering that his little band started my interest in studio recording. But then again, I'm really worried that I'd lose this infinite pool of fun by having that effect that I described earlier, where all of a sudden, okay, I know the guy, and even if he's nice, now it's my buddy from the studio. It's not this band that I've made mine. Yeah. So that's one, and then there's tons of creative people I'd love to work with. Tons of them. Björk is one of them for sure. Kate Bush, I'd love to work with.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
New
Great
people,
answers.
people like Squid or Everything, or Billie Eilish, or people like Jay-Z, I'm sure he could, he's clearly, or Beck, those are people that know how to reach people but still have a sense of adventure, and that is exactly where I'm trying to go with that 3D stuff. Those are the people that will get the train rolling. So I'm in for those.
Awesome. Thank you. Great answer. Next question. What are you currently listening to?
You. Yeah.
That's a good answer.
Actually, that's what it was on my current playlist. So I've been running around. I always make a playlist where I shove stuff that I want to check out. I've listened to the current Squid album. I'm listening to the outtakes of the Revolver album that was on there.
Mm-hmm.
I listened to my son. His name calls himself Buffy, Buffy.
Your son is a solo artist, is that right?
Well, he dabbles in production and doing his thing. He has a real easy hand with lyrics. I think he'll be really, really good. But what he's missing is exactly what we talked about earlier: is a team. Because he's good enough to run Ableton. He's great at writing lyrics. He has basic recording chops, but he's missing the friction of collaboration. No Peter Gabriel without Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you'd hate me for saying that, but it just. But you need to find out what you don't want too. You really do, and awesome. Fabulous stuff. So that's what I'm currently listening to.
Perfect. Next questions are from Jan Pollemans from the Netherlands. He says, have you ever had one singer and just one take for the lead vocal, and that's it?
Yes.
I don't know if he means in terms of arrangements or or the one take thing. I don't know, but that's the question. One singer, one take for the lead vocal.
Jan, yes, I have. And actually many times, a lot of times, singers usually like to do things a bunch of times. But when I do vocals, especially, even if I don't use it that way, I feel like I'll let him do the entire song a couple times. And then we focus on individual parts, if that's what you do. And then at the end, I'll let them sing another song if they still have it in them. And you'd be surprised how much from the imperfect takes, first 3 run-throughs, is being used in the final thing. That doesn't answer your question, but yes, I've had singers like Chaka Khan being one of them. That's just special people. I've worked with some really special people.
Yeah. It's important that you added that, I think, because you can't assume that you can pull that off every single time you record, right?
You're not supposed to, even if you could. I mean, that's the thing. It's not about. I mean, the difficult thing about the digital stuff right now is that you know what you can do afterwards. So the power of post-production is so immense that you catch yourself going during recording, well, if I get one more take of that, then I can turn this into that. So all of a sudden, I'm the artist because I'm taking this raw material. And I think you have to watch yourself, what you're doing it for. So you have to make sure you get the ultimate performance. And if that means doing it 20 times or twice or once. It doesn't matter. You just got to have the ultimate performance, and whatever works, works. You're making a painting. You're not taking a picture.
Yeah.
You're not doing classical music. Classical music is, the piece is done. It's arranged. Everybody knows what they're going to play. A bunch of people are unified sound source in a room, and you as a guy, you capture that properly.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you do. Our world is totally different. The studio is a canvas, and you fill it with paint. It can be, it can be photorealistic, but it's a painting always. So there's nothing wrong with doing 20 takes and making a comp.
Yeah.
But there is something wrong with not wanting to capture the essence of the art.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
There you go,
All right.
Jan. Run with that.
Totally. Thank you. One second question from him is like one tip for DIY self-recording artists these days. Like the one thing you want to tell everyone.
Do, oddly enough, stereo recordings. Don't just do one mic in front of stuff. I think a song, as soon as you have something that has kind of a sound body, acoustic guitar, cello, even something like a clarinet, put more than one mic on it. You don't have to use both if you're done. But I feel like record a sense of the environment that you're in. I personally don't do that for vocals. I'm not one of those people that's like two vocal mics on things. But just record. One of the weird things is, all of us, we have all the space in the world. We don't have to pay 150 or now 300 euros for a roll of tape that holds 15 minutes. We can, get really nice hard disks for 250 that hold a terabyte. So why be stingy? I always say, I can't toss what I don't have.
Yeah.
So record it before you. Don't censor yourself.
Yeah.
And don't censor your time either. If it's not good yet, do it again. I think that's really what you get from the Princes and the Peter Gabriels of this world. They don't stop until they like it. With Prince, it was doing like 20 songs and then picking the 18 that he liked. With Peter Gabriel, it's doing it as long as he needs to until he likes it.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect
But
segue into the next. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Perfect segue into the next question. This is by Ryan Flair from the US this time. He says, what's your view on the timeline and how long music should take to finish? One of the things I struggle with is trying to finish music fast while also not compromising artistic integrity and quality. Where's the line in your opinion? Any tips for those of us who struggle with that?
It kind of goes to what I just said. The one worry I had when I started working for Peter, with his reputation for taking a long time, is that I was socialized in the studio by Prince, who didn't take a long time. It was about catching lightning in a bottle and moving on. It wasn't about refining sounds and stuff like that. Not at all. So I have a pretty good "this is done" meter.
Mm-hmm.
And my personal, very subjective approach would be, just do quite a few things, especially if you're an artist, right? So if you're DIY, you do your own stuff, just do more. And then if you don't like it in 2 years, which if you're a proper artist, you will anyways. I mean, to this day, I'm always surprised if something I did last year doesn't suck. Because I'm always kind of half thinking, I just learned everything that's really important yesterday. So anyway, if you're an artist, in 2 years, you're going to think what you've done now, I could have done that better. I think the only guideline is, at the moment you deliver it, you need to be happy with it. Mm. And then even the day after, or 2 weeks after, you can reconsider. But my approach would be not revisit what you had, but do something else. Just keep on keeping on.
All right. Thank you for that answer. Final question. This comes from Thorsten from Germany. He says, how can something new be created in music production or mixing if each and every one is using reference tracks while working?
That's an excellent question. I mean, everybody uses reference tracks, If you read or watch any of those making ofs, you go like, really? I'll give you an example, because we talked about Muck. Muck tells me about, so the first thing he did with Queen was, this is his story, but he'll forgive me, I'm sure. The first thing he did with his Queen was Crazy Little Thing Called Love, and that was successful. And they were hanging in Munich in the studio that he built, Musicland. And then the bassist came around with this thing, with this bass riff, which turned out Another One Bites the Dust. And Max said, well, you can't use that. That's a total ripoff. And me, him telling me this, I'm like, ripoff of what? What would that be a ripoff of? And he goes, Good Times by Chic. And I've known both riffs my entire life, and I've never put the two together, ever.
Yeah.
But if they kind of changed it a bit. But it's the same thing. It's dum,
never even thought of that.
Dum, get him. It's ba-da-bum, bum, bum, ba-dum, dum, dum, ba-dum.
Yeah.
It's the same skeleton. And nobody ever cared. So who cares? Who cares if everybody gets inspired by something. That's totally okay. The Beatles stuff, some of them are straight ripoffs. John Lennon actually got into trouble because he said in interviews that he lifted a line from a Chuck Berry song or something. Or this song was inspired by one line from there and there, whatever it is. Or this, I want to do a Motown song, whatever it is. And then it doesn't sound anything like it. Why? Because they have personality. And there you go. People out there, that's really what makes the difference between a great artist and an artist that nobody knows, is personality. And there's nothing I can tell you about that. If you have one, project it, I mean, if I would have been the singer of Nirvana, I guarantee you we wouldn't be talking about it right now. But Kurt Cobain just was a force of nature by looking at him and the voice and all that stuff. If you would have been the singers of the Pixies, that's probably who we'd be talking about. And the singer of the Pixies is great. But he's a bald, big dude with a voice that isn't Kurt Cobain's. So that's what I'm saying is, all of this is great, but personality, this is what's coming through. You need to, you're conferring with the audience. So say something. Don't be afraid to do it. And that's the beauty about my life right now. I'm bringing things to the table where people don't go, I don't know. It's not like, this and that. And I've had that so many times, when I was still doing a lot of pop things, like when I was around Musti. For him as well, but for everybody around there would always be the one song a year that I'd have to remake 6 times. And the ones that were good, it didn't matter because the people who made it had a personality, and it didn't matter who they tried to be, because you can never properly copy that well.
Yeah.
That type of stuff.
Awesome answers, Hans-Martin. This is a great way to end this episode. Thank you for answering the listener questions. I'm sure they are going to appreciate this. And I have so many more questions here, but it's impossible to do it today. We're going to do a follow-up in Hamburg, I think. If I'm not wrong, we're going to have a slot there at the podcast lounge. If not, we're going to have to do it. But I think Mark told me about it. Anyway, there's going to be a follow-up at some point because there's so many more things I'd love to know. So if you're up to it, we might continue this in the future. And
sure.
Awesome. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for showing up to this interview and answering all of our questions for 2.5 hours almost. And so, we're going to meet in Hamburg. People, once again, go there. It's the Studio Szene event, and it's happening in October 17th to 19th, I think. Yeah. And Hans-Martin is going to be there. He's going to do a masterclass. And so please go and get your tickets. Can't wait to meet you all. And can't wait to meet you, Hans, in person. It's going to be cool.
Likewise. You guys have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Hans-Martin. Thank you for your time. And
cheers.
Have a nice day, too. Cheers.
Yeah. Cool. See you guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Take care, man.